Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Energy RX. Today, we are diving deep into a fascinating blend of science, spirituality, and ancient wisdom with none other than Dr. Carl Johan Calleman, who has been on my radar since at least 2009. He is a renowned scientist, author of 8 books, and leading expert on the Mayan calendar. His groundbreaking work bridges the gap between ancient cosmology and modern consciousness, offering profound insights into humanity's evolutionary journey. With a PhD in physical biology from a university in Stockholm, Sweden, he'd spent 10 years studying cancer research before coming to the US and working in the sciences at the University of Washington, I believe. But it was during a graduate studies trip to Mexico and Guatemala where it feels like the seeds of his life work were planted. And he'll talk about that a little bit, I think. So he developed this passion for decoding the mysteries of time and creation. Dr. Calleman challenges us to see the world and ourselves in entirely new ways. We'll talk about the 9 waves of creation, to the transformative shifts in human consciousness. Get ready to uncover how the ancient Mayans might have charted the evolution of reality itself. Dr. Calleman's interdisciplinary approach aims to bridge ancient knowledge with contemporary science. So grab your headphones, open your minds, and get ready for an enlightening conversation with Dr. Calleman. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Christine. I'm looking forward to this. I think it's a good time. It's a good timing for a discussion of the big questions and what's really may be looking ahead.
So speaking of timing, at this moment, right now, this is January 20th at 10:12 Mountain Standard Time, which is 12:12 East Coast time, is the swearing in of the presidential inauguration. So this conversation, sort of by by chance, is happening at the exact moment. So I think it's an incredible synchronicity. So we're going to be talking about time. We're going to be talking about consciousness. We're going to be talking about the quantum nature of reality. So yes, the timing of this is, I think, perfection.
Yeah, you can look upon it as an inauguration of a new way of thinking.
Oh, I would love for you to talk about an inauguration of a new way of thinking. That's really beautiful.
Okay, shall I start the
Yes,
inauguration?
so we'll start it because, I think that people sort of were really excited about the Mayan calendar up until 2012. And there was so much energy, so many conversations about, is it going to be the apocalypse? Oh, it was December 21st, 2012, everyone was talking about this end of the Mayan calendar, a lot of fear, a lot of arguments. But Dr. Calleman was a very clear, strong voice that no, A, that wasn't the date, and B, it wasn't the apocalypse. I think you said that date happened in 2011, and it was a change in consciousness that was coming, not the end of the world. So these waves that you speak of consciousness, and like the inauguration of new waves of consciousness.
Yes, certainly the Mayan calendar in the first decade of this century attracted a lot of interest and all kinds of people, some of whom were knowledgeable, but also a lot of people that were not knowledgeable at all about what the Maya were saying or predicting or so forth, were making their voices heard about this. A common idea was that the world would come to an end, but also then there was the opposite, the idea that this would be a fantastic world would be born in one particular day, what they pointed to as December 21st, 2012. I would consistently say that nothing will happen on that particular date, and that has turned out to be true. Nothing did happen on this particular date, and also not even in the year 2012. But there was a big shift in 2011, and it was a shift that we saw, for a short time, I should say. manifestations of what I would call the ninth wave, which is the highest of the nine waves of creation. Highest meaning it is a wave with the highest frequency in this particular time. And so in 2011, we saw a number of phenomena, for instance, the Arab Spring and the Occupy movement, that some people were looking for a much more unified and much more holistic way of approaching politics, if nothing else. Now, as it turned out, that all shifted over into another kind of reality. And you might say that, if anything, the time since 2011 has been a harder times, or there has been things that we thought as humanity that we had already left behind. For instance, the threats to democracy, we thought we had kind of left behind, especially given those kind of movements that were around in the world in the 2011 years. But then the pandemic, and then the increasing global climate change and other things made things sort of look more dark, and we're still in that time period. Now, a fundamental thing that I want to convey when it comes to the nature of the Mayan calendar is that it's not a linear calendar. Rather, it's best described as a kind of a wave movement. And in ancient times, people all over the world would talk about cosmic serpents that were, playing a role in the way life was lived. And this was especially the case in the Americas, or in Mesoamerica, I would say. Not only in Mesoamerica, also in what is now the US Southwest, people would worship something they called the plumed serpent, or the feathered serpent. You might think, okay, you hear about a serpent, that sounds like some kind of minor deity, because ancient peoples, everything they made into deities and so forth. But that's not the case. It was the major deity in ancient times. And for instance, in Mexico, you can still go to Chichen Itza on the Yucatan and watch the descent of the plumed serpent on the equinoxes.
And I have a picture of this for you. This is from your website. So that is the temple of Chichen Itza, and that is the serpent rising on the equinox.
Yes, wonderful. There was also something in Cholula, which is a place in southern Mexico as well, not Mayan, but southern Mexico, which was once the world's largest pyramid. And it was destroyed by the Spanish, who then made it, instead of the pyramid, made a cathedral at that particular location. But that pyramid, the largest pyramid in the world, was dedicated to the plumed serpent. And so we should not delude ourselves and think this was some kind of a minor sideline deity. It was the most significant creator deity in these cultures in ancient times. And the point where I'm saying this really is that with that comes an understanding that things are not just linear. It's not just you have, say, what we experience as good times, and then there will be just sort of better and better and better. Rather, it is a wave movement where the world goes up and down, and there are time periods that are creative, that are more creative than the others. And those, you might say, if you look upon it as a wave, would be the time periods that are peaks, when the serpent goes up. But then always follows this a valley or trough after this peak. And you might say, if you were the creator, maybe the idea behind this is that, you have to destroy the old world in order to create some new world. And with every new peak in these wave movements, you would have some new creativity. And now the thing is, though, that there are 9 such waves. The universe have been created by 9 such waves. It's not just sort of a fantasy. Yes, you might say there are not actually serpents, or they're not actually snakes flying in the sky, but the what there is a wave movement of creativity, a macrocosmic quantum wave, and not just one of them. As you can see in the picture that Christine showed, with the 9 storied pyramids, each of these levels of the pyramid, each of these levels, you can see it's like a terrace-shaped pyramid. Each one of them brings a wave, but they're a little bit different. It's like each one of them brings a state of consciousness, a wave that changes human consciousness, and we're all in resonance with it. But the world today is very complex because all 9 waves have been activated. And that was the real meaning of the 2011 shift in the Mayan calendar. The real meaning was that all the various waves were now active and would in various ways contribute to how the course of humanity will unfold. And that makes it complex because the waves are not always in sync. Sometimes they are and so forth, but it means that it's a complex phenomenon to understand. And yet it seems, and I think my work has proven that there is a time plan. You know, we may not always understand exactly in what way it will be going, and very often we tend to maybe be overly optimistic, but sometimes overly pessimistic. There are those people that talked about the end of the world in 2012. So anyway, in short, what I'm saying here is that the evolution of humankind, the evolution of the universe, is based on a series of 9 waves. And those are waves that are influencing our minds and shape our consciousness. And depending on what we develop resonance with, the world will turn into various kinds of directions.
Okay, so when you were describing the waves, you're like, well, so everyone was excited in 2011, the Arab Spring, where we were sort of seeing this revolution happen, women wanting their voices heard, they want this freedom, democracy. Occupy Wall Street. If you don't remember Occupy Wall Street, that is, people were camped out in front of Wall Street, drums, musicians were there, and they were demanding a change to the financial structure and the imbalance between the haves and haves nots. They were wanting equality, they were wanting fairness. And it was really this beautiful, really exciting moment. And then, things seemed to change. So when you talk about these waves, are you sort of describing also a little bit of the duality where we have the light in part of the wave, but then the shadow in part of the wave? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a little bit more complex like that. Some of these waves are what I would call dualist. In other words, they have both light and darkness, so to speak. And that duality shapes humanity in certain ways, but not all of them. There are also waves like the 9th wave that is sort of bringing just a pure, unfiltered consciousness, a kind of a unity consciousness, a unity with all that is, you might say. But then this shapes people's how they perceive reality. So if you, for instance, are in resonance with a dualist mind, it means that you will sort of tend to project duality onto others. And so you will say, these are the good people, they deserve all the good things of the world. And then your mind would automatically say that, well, here at the same time we have the bad people, and they should not have anything of the world.
Okay.
That's kind of a dualist frame of consciousness has shaped the world for for the duration of what the Maya would call the long count, which has been dominating human society for 5,000 years about. Then there are several other ones, but the ninth wave is sort of kind of one that doesn't have that filter, then one that doesn't project separation onto others or onto yourself. Because, part of the sixth wave or the long count dualist state of consciousness, it doesn't only lead you to project the duality onto others, as I just described. You also start to look upon yourself in that kind of a way, like you have a good and a bad side, and from which religious ideas of sin and guilt and so forth have been generated. So it has had many, many different kinds of consequences, some of which are political, others that are religious, and some are technological.
So the sixth wave was, if I understand it correctly, when the sixth wave happened, that was the rise of religion.
Well, yeah, you might say religions came with that. It's not
Okay.
only the rise of religions, but it's also the rise of nations, the rise of monarchies, which was a reflection of this duality, so to speak, that
Mhm.
people were really separated into major groups, whether they were of the nobility and the royalty, which was just a few, of course, and then the others were maybe slaves and peasants. But
Right.
that came with the same at the same time. And as I understand it, before this 5,000 years, people were more in a state of consciousness that you might refer to as shamanistic.
Yeah.
It's sort of a unity consciousness, where you were unified with nature, and you were not separating yourself from nature. Then only with the sixth wave religions came, and religions was sort of, the word religion means to reconnect. And it means, the fact that people start to use that word of religion means that that original connection, that sort of unity with the highest spirit of the universe, had been lost. And religions are basically a response to that loss of unity that existed originally among human beings.
So do you think as the waves came in, this different consciousness settles into the planet, into the collective consciousness, and so there was sort of a gradual disconnection from direct relationship with a creator being, with the universe?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's what I believe. Yeah.
that's really interesting. So the wave brought that, one of the waves brought that in. And so, as a response to missing this connection to the universe, to feeling that, they brought in something to sort of replace that in a way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Probably many of the practices, not all of them, of course, but some of the practices of religions have been sort of just in order to reconnect. It was a connect. You have in the Bible there is this metaphor for the expulsion from the Garden of Eden.
Right.
And for me personally, at least, I don't believe there was a literal Garden of Eden. But there was a state of consciousness at that point in time where people were in unity with the divine. And then the expulsion from that is a metaphor to describe the fact that that unity was lost, and people were out to fend on their own in the world of um, duality.
The road, yeah. Okay, I really, really loving this information, because sometimes you hear something and it sort of hits you in a different way.
Yeah.
It makes sense to you. So that makes sense. So I think people may be a little bit confused. I want to take a step back. I could go so forward with this conversation, but I'm sure people are wondering, well, where is this information coming from, and what
Mm.
is the Mayan calendar even? So the Mayan, and we don't, the Mayan calendar, we could sit probably and talk about 7 hours very easily trying to understand it. So we're going to try, I think, to distill it down really simply. I think there's some books that are interpreted. There's carvings and etchings, and so where you're getting this info, you've decoded, and your life work, and to understand this as well. So beginning his work as a scientist, I would say something was seeded when as a graduate student, you went to Mexico, and that you didn't begin the work then, but I think it was interesting also talking about timing. That
Yeah.
when you landed in Mexico, it happened to be the Day of the Dead, just by accident. So all of this, the Day of the Dead, so you have the celebrations and the colors and the smells and all of this happening around you, which I'm sure was almost intoxicating, right? And
Yeah.
so this love sort of was really easy to download in a way into your
Yeah.
consciousness, maybe reactivate something within you that was already dormant, perhaps, because I think you felt quite at home there, and quite you had this amazing experience. So just if you could just maybe give, like talking to, an elementary school student, right, a basic way to understand how you have come to understand these waves of the creation, that clearly the Mayans had this incredible wisdom and timekeeping and the cyclical nature that they wanted future people to understand, and you have done your mission and done your job of helping future people to understand what they were trying to tell us. So if you could just give that a little description of that.
Yeah. Well, sure. Even as a child, I took a lot of interest in history,
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking. And, one of the enigmas of history, you might say, is the fact that people on both continental blocks, both in the Americas and in the old world, people were building pyramids.
Right.
And few people believe that they did that because they had contacts, and I don't believe that either. But
Right.
it's a mystery, because why would, first of all, we hardly know what the pyramids are there for. We have some ideas, many different ones. But then why would the people have it on both of these continents? That's sort of a strange idea, because it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work to build a pyramid, for sure. It must have some significant meaning, and to be there. So anyway, so at a fairly early point in my life, I started to wonder about these things. And then I felt I should go to Mexico, and it had a pull on me. And as you said, I came to Mexico City the first time at this remarkable Day of the Dead, and it was very chaotic, and everybody was visiting their deceased ancestors in the little villages outside of the city, and everybody was going in all kinds of directions. And I was coming from the laboratory in Stockholm, in rational Sweden, and where you were not supposed to, to speculate too much far away, so to speak. But then it just turned out that I fell in love with Mexico, and I still love Mexico. I still am very, there's something alive with that country that I really appreciate. And so I felt when I was there, and also when I went down to Guatemala, and when I was visiting some of the pyramid sites, that this is where I belong, and or this is where my mission, my purpose in life resided. And so it was a really life-altering event, though it took another maybe 10 or 13 years until I left my previous scientific career and devoted myself completely to doing this. But then I also did get in contact with a Mayan calendar during that trip, and in various ways. There was something called Villas Arqueológicos, sort of hotels at the archaeological sites, and they had a lot of books that I could study, and I got to see these little cryptical symbols that to this day the Mayan elders will be using in order to keep track on the energies of time. And I understood that this way of looking at time was fundamentally different from what I was used to. In other words, it was not just about measuring time and now we've gone an hour, another 2 hours, or a day, or a week, or something like that. No, it was a calendar that described shifting energies of time. So it could go from being the day of the monkey to being the day of the dead to being something else. And then, of course, the question is, well, is there a reality to this? And I also did come across the book by Michael Coe, who was a Mayanist scholar, who talked about the calendar, the long count coming to an end in 2011. Pretty certain today that he was wrong about that. Nonetheless, it stuck with me, and I then started to study it on my own, and with the help of some books that have been written on this topic. But my own work, I took a little bit of a different approach compared to other people that studied the Mayan calendar prior to 2011. They may, for instance, have been very interested in the astronomical cycles and how they would correlate to the Mayan calendar system. And there is some relevance to that. But to me, I thought the important thing here is really to find out, is this a prophetic calendar? Is it a calendar that actually describes something about what happens on our planet? And if so, how can it do that? And one of the interesting questions, I went then to Palenque and had a tour guide, and who then was supposedly knowing what the calendar was about as much as anybody could at that point in time. But then, he mentioned the fact that the long count, the calendar that the Maya would use to date all their pyramids and altars and all these things, that long count had started in 3115 BC. And then I asked him, why, what was this reason? What was the reason for that? Of course, knowing that the modern world basically bases its chronology on the purported birth of Jesus, or if you're a Muslim, the Hajj, the movement of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina. So there was no doubt of what those calendars were meant to have as starting points.
Right.
But then I asked him, what happened then? No, he said it was just mythological. They don't know that it was anything there. Now, I knew enough of history that the first real civilizations on our planet, in Egypt and Mesopotamia, and maybe a few other places as well, that basically they appeared on our planet about 5,100 years ago, which would be exactly when this Mayan long count would begin. Okay, so then there was this connection. Okay, the calendar begins, civilizations begin, and civilizations, as I already mentioned, they are partly what comes with them is religions, but also, in other words, a new way of thinking about the universe compared to the shamanistic state people had been in previously. But it was also this. It also came with this organized society in sort of a hierarchical fashion, and so my thought then would be, well, maybe there was a global shifting consciousness that happened at that time, and that global shifting consciousness made people relate to each other in a completely new way, and then that became a beginning point for my work. But I still debate with some people who are sort of just focusing on the astronomical aspects of the calendar, because that's not very important, I think. What's important is to see to what extent it actually shows that there is a time plan for humanity, and where that time plan comes from and where it might be going.
Where it might be going. So I understand there are these 9 waves, so that, and we can look at the 9 waves. If you think back to the picture of Chichen Itza that I showed you, that there was the base is right. The base of the pyramid is the first wave, right? And it builds up
Yes.
to level 9. So the base of that pyramid, that would be wave 1. Would that be when the pyramids, that wave was when the pyramids in Mexico and Guatemala and Egypt and other places in the world began? Is that what I'm
No.
understanding?
No, I don't
Okay.
think so. So the
Okay.
first wave, it actually started 16.4 billion years ago.
Oh, okay. So I definitely need to understand this better. Okay. So
Okay.
the first wave is 16.
0.4
Okay.
billion years ago. And so that is
Big Bang.
basically the Big Bang.
Okay.
This is the beginning of the universe. And then every wave has a higher frequency, 20-fold higher frequency than the one that it stands upon. So when you climb step by step, you will climb to higher frequencies of change, basically. But the 4 lowest waves were actually about life and biological evolution. And then with the fifth wave, which started 100,000 years ago, for the first time were beings, humans in this case, that started
Okay.
to express themselves symbolically and artistically. That had not happened. You don't find any art, any cave paintings or anything like that prior to 100,000 years ago. Then 5,000 years, then suddenly, and it was quite sudden, it's been an enigma for historians for a long time, how suddenly that the civilizations came up. And then you might say the seventh wave started in 1755, so that's the Industrial Revolution. The eighth
Okay.
wave started in 1999, that's the Digital Revolution. And the ninth wave started in 2011. And that's the one that we're still working to connect to, I would say. At least I'm working to connect to, and I know a number of other people that are working in order to connect to it. It's sort of a little bit of a return to the shamanistic state of consciousness, but still, yeah. So,
Yes, we're working towards. So the beginning waves were very, very, very long
yeah,
periods of time. So they had this exponential increase in speed because I
yes.
think the last wave was very, maybe under a year. The
Yeah, the ninth wave, which is the highest, is a wave period up and down is just 36 days. And so you can follow that wave on the internet and see what every day is. And it's so we're actually right now we're in the bottom level of that valley, so to speak.
okay.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't want to look at it because it's
Is there is there I know some days have certain names or
yeah.
numbers associated. What is today?
Oh, okay. Oops. What was that? It would just take a
That's
second.
okay. So for those while he's looking for that, so he was saying
Oh,
before.
it's 10 Ben. 10 Ben is a Mayan word.
Okay.
10 is the number 10. Ben means the authority, or yeah. Or sometimes it's translated as staff, staff in the sense of here I have a Mayan staff
Oh,
given to me, so to speak. So that's for today. Um, so yeah,
okay.
authority is established today. I think that's correct.
Okay, well that so thinking of timing that tracks with today.
Yeah, yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah,
Okay, so with the calendar, we suddenly go through these waves that we had billions of years in the bottom levels that come up to they happen faster and faster.
yeah,
So what I think is would be really interesting to talk about today is how we can work with the waves, with the energy in some way. How do we, because it feels like there is this opportunity with these waves that come in, and when you this is another complicated conversation, but these waves emanating from sort of a galactic center or tree of life, that's another conversation. People will wonder,
Yeah.
maybe we can touch on that a little bit. But I think I would love to have some ways that we can work with the energies that are around us, that are coming in, so that we can all move with it with a little bit more flow rather than so much fear. I saw this meme the other day and I was like, that meme feels really true. And it was a meme on the internet and it said, if I saw a dragon flying overhead, I'd be surprised, but not surprised. I think a lot of us can sort of relate to that because,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be surprised, but not like really surprised. So the world seems very just chaotic and confusing. So I'm asking you kind of a big question here. I do want to touch on this galactic core where these waves emanate from, but then how we work with that to be a little bit more comfortable in this time period.
Yeah, yeah. I think one thing that everybody can do is to download that wave pattern for the ninth wave, which is that highest wave, so to speak. And let's see if I can give you the. Well, it's a little bit of a complex address, but basically just ninth wave calendar. And
Okay.
what's good about that is that if you start to follow this wave, you're starting to realize that this is a real thing, so to speak. And my own work in books and so forth may also be useful because, it demonstrates a lot of connections, a lot of, like what I mentioned, that 5,100 years ago, the first civilizations happened to pop up. Or for that matter, the Big Bang begins at the very beginning of the first wave.
Right.
So it's I think it's very important for people to know that there is this kind of a time plan. And even though originally the Spanish priests would do what they could to destroy it and burnt all the books that were available, possibly because this was a much more advanced time plan than the biblical or what they were used to. But
Right.
the idea is still that there is some kind of a benevolent intelligence at the source of the existence of this existence, and that is the source of the evolution, wave-like evolution of everything. Of the universe, but including ourselves and including the relationships that we may have with others. So I think that's an important thing to know, and most people don't know it. Most people have no idea that this is how the universe evolves. But then what to do about it? Well,
Right.
I think the first thing that also everybody can do is then, if the ninth wave is the highest wave, and meaning that if this is where all the evolution of the universe is going towards, then it makes sense that this is somewhere where we would all want to go. And you can also understand that if there is a mind that comes out of that doesn't have any filters, but then is sort of open to unity with all beings, you might say, then there is a positive end result, an intended end result of this cosmic time plan that the Maya charted. So then comes another decision I think people must make, which is, do they want to be part of this? Which is an intention I think people need to set. And once you set the intention, then you might start to seek the tools and the methods and the means to go in that direction.
I love
Okay.
that. I think intention is so important. So if you make the intention
Yeah.
to align with this consciousness, to move, that I intend to move back towards the state of unity consciousness, and perhaps back towards this place of my own sovereign connection with a creator being, with the universe, with cosmic intelligence, insert whatever word, with God, whatever word that is comfortable for you.
Yeah. Good. Okay, but these are things that anybody can do. The things that I have mentioned here. But then, how do you? Are there? The question is, are there means of making the quantum leap from the state that you're in to that ninth wave state of consciousness? Because one of the things about the Mayan calendar is that it's basically a quantum system. And what that means is that when you shift from one state to another, it is like making a leap. And that's why they built their pyramids, invariably built their pyramids like formed pyramids, where you make a leap, you jump, so to speak, from one. It's not a gradual shift. If you shift, for instance, between today, the Ben, the authority day, and tomorrow, Jaguar, then it's not a gradual change. It is at some point in that shift, there is a quantum leap that takes you from one day to another. But it's the same if you go from one level of consciousness to another level of consciousness. And what I do recommend as one thing that I have confidence in is my collaborator Patricia Albert, who has developed something called the evolutionary collective, and which whose whole intention and purpose is to facilitate for people to make that quantum leap. So that is one thing that I feel confident about recommending for those that seek to be part of the quantum leap. And I think that may require the kind of intention. Now, in addition, I don't want to exclude anything. There might be a number of other paths, so to speak, sometimes belonging to religious traditions or spiritual traditions that may also work. But I think it's when it comes to making the shift from the eighth wave to the ninth wave state of consciousness, it's really on where maybe eighth wave, there is all kinds of spiritual practices or methods that have been developed in the past couple of decades. But some of them, or most of them maybe, are very geared towards the individual development as separate from others, so to speak. There are many practices or traditions that are geared towards you becoming enlightened. Mm-hmm. Well, personally, I'm not sure if that is what the world needs now. It sounds good, and I'm sure it's better with people being enlightened than being endarkened. But what I do think is that we have to find that unified state of consciousness. I should not say that there be a number of different such practices out there. There might be, but I think for those that are seriously wanting to climb to the top of the pyramid in terms of what the universe means for us to accomplish in this universe, then you'll have to have some discernment and look for what actually goes to some kind of a unified thing rather than just your own personal.
Okay. So I think I have a better understanding about that. So I think it's really interesting. We're talking about where we're going. And I think this is really fascinating that today is the day of authority. Right now, the inauguration in the United States is happening. I heard you on a podcast 10 months ago, and I thought this was so fascinating. This is well before the election. And you were talking about these waves and how you were interpreting it. And what you foresaw looking at these waves was you made a statement and you said, I could see Trump, Putin, and Xi aligning, having some sort of global power, that their way that the waves looked to you, that there in the collective, there was a bent towards this authoritarianism, and that there would be this wave of this until 2031, when then there would be a shift. So can you talk about that a little bit? I was fascinated that you said that 10 months ago.
Yeah, right. So you're saying exactly what I said, and I'm happy to that you are representing that correctly. Well, sometimes there's a lot of background that needs to be conveyed, and we don't have that time to convey.
Right.
But in a sense, the shift in 2011, in a sense, you can say that up until then, in the whole time period, 1617 to 2011, time period that was called a Baktun by the Maya,
Okay.
it was a world of dominance of the West, a duality world of dominance of the West. That comes to an end in the sixth wave in 2011. And instead, sort of, you might say it's a little bit like the light goes out on the Western Hemisphere. And instead, what is created is a kind of a unity in the dark, you might say.
Okay.
And I think, many people can probably relate to seeing that in the US among individuals changing their attitudes and so forth about world politics and so forth. But it also means that presumably the dominance that the West, and in particular then the United States, has had for such a long time, at least since World War II, that is now coming to an end.
Okay.
And what will happen then is that presumably the East, in particular, and this is based on parallels of these waves. The way you study these waves, if you study the parallels before, is that the East will become more prominent. And at this moment, it doesn't look like that, but it could well change very rapidly in about a year or two. And then maybe these strongmen, if we use the most polite word, leading the huge countries, so the bigger countries in the world, maybe they will get together. They will be pushed together because of this shift in how the energies are working on a global scale.
Okay.
And that may not be immediately very happy thing for all of us. But on the other hand, there is something potentially good about that, which is that it could sort of take down this kind of competition and conflict that has been ruling the world for 5,000 years or something like that. And based on that unity coming out, whether you like that kind of a unity or not, and whether I like it or not, that's really not what the cosmos is asking. The cosmos has its plan. But then there is another shift coming in the seventh wave. So here you can hear how that this is a little bit complex, because there are several waves you need to take into account. And that shift will be one that goes away from nationalism. It goes away from dictatorships or authoritarianism, and instead it's a wave that for at least 20 years then will favor freedom and democracy and so forth. But that would, if this is all turns out to be true, then that would be happening on a global scale instead, and then provide sort of a better platform for these higher steps in consciousness that we've been talking about. So because they should not really be looked upon as separately working, these different waves, because the eighth and even the ninth wave is continuing to run in parallel, and people will have, at least those that make that intention, they will have that opportunity to go in that direction, and then maybe be part of leading the world into sort of a unified world, maybe without nations in the long run, at least without nations, and maybe without conflicts, reasonably without conflicts. So I think that should clarify a little bit. I guess there's something about this I want to add with when it comes to the plumed serpent, because it's commonly perceived that the pendulum swings in history.
Right.
Sometimes it swings over long periods of time. Sometimes it swings very shortly, so to speak. And now the Mayan calendar system, it incorporates that whole idea. The pendulum swings in history. Just because now, for instance, we're present to a manifestation of something new coming in, it doesn't mean that it will last forever. I would say the Mayan calendar system says the opposite, that it will come down and up and down, and the pendulum will continue to swing in history. And we're not powerless in this, but it all depends on what each one of us, what do we intend to, and how will we relate to these various shifts? But the intention is as you also said, Christine, is a crucial thing in this. But the intention may not manifest immediately. The
Right.
waves will tell when the time has come for this. And there are times that are sort of just preparations, and then there are times that are manifestations when you follow these waves.
Right. So right now it feels like we're all invited to prepare ourselves for these waves, that the more of us that hold that intention to align with this ninth wave, to align with unity consciousness more, to align with your own sovereign connection to the word that you want to use for cosmic consciousness. And the more of us that do that, then the more I feel like the more likely it is that we can more easily bring forward that level of consciousness, which is where the Mayan calendar is what I'm understanding is preparing us for and saying that we're going. So I love this idea of what you're talking about too, reminding people who are listening that this all does swing, and perhaps, there may be some challenges in these next 6 years that we're all faced, but to hold our own energy, to not allow ourselves to be in despair, to be in fear, to understand that, yes, this is part of these cycles. And sometimes there can be this destruction to bring in a higher order.
Yeah. Well, you could say more strongly than that. In order to bring a higher order, there must be some real significant disturbance before that, I would think.
I would agree. So I think we're right about our hour mark. I am so just grateful to have had this conversation with you today. Can you tell our listeners how people can connect with you? I know you have all these books on Amazon and other places, but I think there are courses. So what is the best way for people to connect with you?
Well, thank you. Yes. So the best way is simply to go to my website, calleman.com,
Mhm.
and it's spelled CALLEMAN.com. And there I will advertise when I have courses, which I have over a sequence of Saturdays usually, going into depth and showing with diagrams really how this works. Then, you can also go to Amazon, where there are my books. I think there are 8 of them in total at this point, and you can order those if you want. And then there are a number of interviews and so forth on YouTube in my name. But I think if you feel this talk that Christine and I have had together here, that it speaks to you and you feel it's important to understand more deeply, then I would suggest that you would either buy a book or participate in a course, because you need the diagrams and you need the pictures and more.
But I'd love to read the names of some of your books because
Okay.
they're so fascinating. So you can get a sense of what he has to share with you and teach you. One is The Mayan Calendar and the Transformation of Consciousness. There is Solving the Great Mystery of Our Time, the Mayan Calendar. There is The Purposeful Universe, How Quantum Theory and Mayan Cosmology Explain the Origin and Evolution of Life. There is The Global Mind, and the Rise of Civilization, The Quantum Evolution of Consciousness. There's the 9 Waves of Creation, Quantum Physics, Holographic Evolution, and the Destiny of Humanity. There is the Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. There's Manifesting the Mind, A Roadmap to Consciousness in a Quantum World. And there is The Living Universe, Understanding the Cosmic Purpose. Every one of these books sounds so intriguing and exciting to read and right up my alley. So I would imagine you all would be interested too. Dr. Calleman, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really am grateful to have had this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Christine. I really enjoyed it. I think you are really a ninth waver yourself. It's so amazing synchronicity, so to speak, taking place, inauguration of different things.
Yes. Well, that's a very high compliment coming from you that I'm being called ninth wave. So thank you. Now you just made my day.
Good.
All right. Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.